Test, 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 check, check.
In-person presenter friends, are you guys ready?
Ready.
Check
Ready.
1, 2. Can you guys hear us?
Yes,
Yep.
Greg's gonna sing for us. Thank you, Greg. Okay, we'll get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We are happy to be sharing this presentation with you. It's called Diversity, Equity, Inclusion within the NSE Consortium, a roundtable discussion. And this is brought to you by the NSE DEI Committee. This committee seeks to provide insight and counsel for NSE on matters related to national and local challenges, opportunities, and priorities related to diversity, equity, and inclusion for exchange students and member campuses. We welcome you to engage in a community discussion related to equity, diversity, and inclusion within consortium member campuses. The goal of this session is to promote a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment that encourages active participation by attendees in both small and large groups. Nope, sorry, I think we're going to do one large group. That was a last minute change. This is a follow-up session from last year's DEI conference presentation, but attendance at last year's session is not required to fully participate in this session. Next slide, hold on, that's me. Oops, what happened? There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with an introduction of our presentees. My name is Reina Tagalikud. I am from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I have the honor of serving as chair of this DEI committee.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Allison Yap from the University of Hawaii at Manoa also, and a happy member of the DEI committee for the consortium.
Land acknowledgement. Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homelands sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home.
Greg, holy moly. Hi, Greg Golden, University of New Mexico, pronouns he, him. I'll be on the journey as well today.
Hi, Anna Oaks from Minnesota State Mankato, she, her.
Hi, I'm Gemma Lund from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and on the DEI committee as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Leahy, and I'm the coordinator at SUNY Plattsburgh. For those of you joining us virtually, if you'd like, you can pin the Burbank room and the presentation if that helps you while you're viewing, just as a tip.
Awesome. Thank you for that. You know, I think I realized I forgot to mention a few more things. Let me go back to my notes. Okay, so this session is accommodating, of course, both in-person and virtual attendees. We'll be using OWL, which is a virtual conferencing camera to connect in-person and virtual attendees. I haven't used it before, so this is a learning experience for me. Thank you, Greg, for lending your OWL to us. Are we using OWL?
Hey, Reina, we brought Hedwig the owl, but we nixed Hedwig the owl based on the tech suggestions. So
got it.
We're just going old school with the broadcast camera.
Okay, thank you. So quick update, we're not using Hedwig. Sorry, guys. I thought the presentation looked the same and I was thinking, how does OWL different? But anyways, that explains it. Okay, so no. But there will be opportunities for group discussion, and we will do it, I guess, with in person. You could raise your hand, and Daniela, thank you for being our in-person host, and she will give you the microphone. And if you have virtual and you have a comment or question, you can raise your hand, and then we'll call you, and then you could share with the group. Okay, so now we're okay with announcements. Agenda, super quick overview. We will start with a review of last year's session and National Systemic Racism events. We'll have two types of case studies, the first featuring campus DEI activities, and the second being campus efforts to prepare students for cultural differences and intercultural competence on exchange, and also working with students and colleagues from diverse backgrounds. And again, there'll be opportunity for group discussions. So let me go to the next slide and next slide. There we go. Okay, take it away, friends.
Okay, hi everyone. So at last year's conference, if you joined us, the DEI committee presented a session entitled Meaningful Discussions on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion amongst our campuses. And we facilitated breakout room discussion groups on 4 different topics: social justice, the January 6th insurrection, women in leadership, and the impact of COVID. What we found was that the session was very well received, and it really generated a lot of meaningful and hopeful dialogue among the NSE coordinators. And there seemed to be a genuine desire for more opportunities for us to discuss DEI issues with the consortium. So this presentation is one such opportunity. Next slide.
Cool. So folks, one of the key or signature ways that we are best suited to discuss issues of diversity, equity, inclusion is to look at it within the context of current events typically. I'm not sure how many folks, I want to be really transparent. I'll give a summary. There were articles that were posted in the Whova. If you got a chance to review them, awesome. If not, we'll bail you out. There's no pop quiz or anything, but I'll give you a quick review of just some current events. I want to acknowledge that these are not all encompassing by any means. If you Google today and you wanted to know about all the terrible things that are happening on campuses across the country, across the world, et cetera, I'm sure that you'll get a fresh new scope. But these were just some places that we can start. And I think it illustrates that we are not even close to beyond racial issues on college campuses, right? Systemic doesn't even get to the bottom of it. There's a lot of different issues. So first, I'll just give you your most brief of summaries. By show of hands on Zoom and also in the room, if you're familiar with Ahmaud Arbery and the verdict of Ahmaud Arbery, right? Just a casual man out for a jog and was targeted for some pretty direct, just running while black, basically. And 3 white supremacists ended his life. So, but there was a verdict that was out recently, and I know that there could be some responses to those things. Not asking people to go if it's really traumatic. Just remember, if we do ask about one of these things and you don't feel like sharing because it's still too traumatic, just want to acknowledge that it's hard for some folks. And you are not under any obligation to do that. But other things you may not have heard about: bomb threat at a Black Cultural Center at University of Utah. Not sure if colleagues from the Utah area are here or on Zoom today. Just show of hands. Sure. I'm not sure. We might value your perspective as we get to the discussion questions about if you heard about this and what the impact was for your campus or surrounding areas. Racist comments about Asians from UPenn. I know we have multiple campuses in the Philly area, which is why we selected this particular incident. Just a professor saying some really insensitive things regarding immigration issues and why they felt that we needed fewer Asian foreign travelers to the United States to become citizens and so forth. Just things that don't really reflect the values of most universities in our general populace, right? A Black History mural at University of Washington that was vandalized. In the article we post, there's a discussion from the student creator of said mural and the impact that he felt as a student. I think it resonates because there's other students that student speaks for who feel the same way. And he was the artist, right? So there's a different experience from that student. Not to go into a political front, but continued voter suppression. If you look at the voter map, at this particular place, it was in Alabama near Birmingham. They make African Americans make up 25% of the populace, but the way that districts were drawn made it really difficult for their voices to be heard in their state representation. So those things are common. And then bomb threats to HBCUs and so forth. I mean, none of these things, I feel like at some point we get desensitized because we hear of so many issues. And I think it's important for us to reflect and take a moment just to say, this isn't actually supposed to be normal. And we have different responses to these issues. So what we're hoping to do, we have a couple of guiding discussion questions just to get some immediate thoughts and perceptions from the group, because we don't often get these opportunities and spaces maybe on campus, just to create a space to be able to do that. So Allison and I are going to kind of try and get we're going to be in a big group for this first one, just based on some of the challenges of trying to do 2 different discussion groups. But we've got just some basic questions. Curious about folks' immediate responses to any of these events specifically, or the impact you personally or professionally, or students that you're working with. If anyone is comfortable just kind of sharing, we'd love to create space for that. So we can start on Zoom and then bop back to the main room or something like that. How's that sound, Allison?
Sure, that'd be great. Anyone on Zoom have any thoughts? As Greg said, you know, one of the goals of this session is just to check in with each of us personally and professionally and see how we're doing. Yeah, Eric.
Okay, it's obviously we have HB 11. I don't know if you've heard of that here in Alabama, and it kind of stems with a lot of this discourse and rhetoric that's going around. And especially in this case here in Alabama, it's a House bill similar to many across the country that are trying to restrict the teaching of anything that even resembles critical race theory. And part of the bill in its earlier forms was that, you would get fired for talking about these things in class. So I'm a professor as well as doing the NSE and exchange stuff. I'm also on the faculty senate, and we have brought this up and discussed it in the faculty senate about the impacts and the impacts on academic freedom, the impacts on minorities, and trying to develop a coherent response as well as engage with politicians to try to get them to understand how this impacts us as institutes of higher education. And a lot of it literally is, the politicians using wedge issues to try to gain votes, that they don't even as much intend to enforce it. They water down the wording so that the university can consider firing someone instead of actually firing them, things like that. But we also have tried to respond in other ways. So in particular here at the College of Business at Montevallo, we're an AACSB institution. And, I looked through our accreditation process, and diversity initiatives are included in 2 out of every 3 of the standards for accreditation. So this actually can also impact colleges and universities in terms of their accreditation, in terms of accreditation of specific colleges and departments or programs. And that needs to be another way that we can respond to this, and getting other partners, such as the accrediting organizations in the United States, to voice their opposition to certain initiatives or laws, or basically the rhetoric that is creating this climate of intimidation and fear on issues like that. So this is just something that our campus is dealing with, and we're trying to deal with it in a proactive way to prevent further impact on our diversity here at the campus. And it's something that's really important, I think, to all of us.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Eric. Greg, do you have anyone there in person that wants to chime in?
Danielle will bring you the mic.
I think they can be uncomfortable issues to talk about if you've never been in a position where you've openly talked about issues of race before. But for some people, it's important to talk about them because there's no way of ignoring issues of race. I used to be a high school history teacher in the Bronx. I taught US history. All of my students were students of color. And so it was very important to them to, teach about issues of race and equity and inclusion throughout US history. And so this current wave of banning critical race theory in schools is very, very troubling for me. because it leads to bad history education and it leads to the erasure of identities, which is awful. So that's my initial thought about some of these current events.
Cool. Chuck had a hand up too. Can we take, can we steal two, Raina? We got another one ready to roll, so.
Go for it.
Cool.
I think something that is very salient to me is I watched the State of the Union, and then following the State of the Union, I watched the Republicans' response to the State of the Union. And what's really troubling to me is that it seems that education is now really being made into the battlefield for talking about racial inequality and social justice. And it just seems like that entire branch of our US politics are like leveling their eyes to kind of take down educating on these issues. And it's happening on a lot of different levels. Like it's sad to hear about what we just heard going on in Alabama. And then I also know that there's an online website called Professor Watch List, which seeks out to basically label professors that are teaching truth, in fact, as radical leftist propaganda pushers. And so I think that there are some dark times ahead of us in regards to education on all of these issues.
I'd like to add a real quick comment to what you just said. On our campus, we have student clubs who are kind of percolating up and have become Turning Point USA. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that group. So there's been some movement within the students to kind of really bring some of these issues forward. And it just feels that we're still kind of, like you said, dark times ahead, so we're not quite sure where we're going, but we, the university recognized them as a student club. And so we're kind of working through that too.
Anyone on Zoom, Allison, or comments in the chat or anything like that? If not, we got some over here too. So yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Cool.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting because the excuse that's given a lot to oppress critical race study is that it makes kids feel uncomfortable or bad, which is obviously a facade to just continue this systemic oppression of certain groups. But pretending that that is true and that we should be protecting children from, or people in general, from feeling bad. I think if you look at racial developmental theory, particularly in racial understanding of people's themselves as white, understanding how your ancestors have oppressed and created genocide, done lots of bad things, is just a part of understanding our history. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable about that. And it's okay to feel even bad about that because they're not good things. Understanding that you did not do those things, but your ancestors did. And I think it's okay to encourage people to feel okay with feeling uncomfortable, which is really a good overlay with us with National Student Exchange, because we are encouraging students every day to go out and feel uncomfortable in new places, in new spaces, so that they can learn about themselves and learn about people who are different from them. So I think in this time, our role in creating a united America specifically, but Canada, yes, too, is so much more important, because by encouraging students to go out and experiencing different cultures within America and different backgrounds and people within America is gonna what's hopefully bring America together.
I'm missing my Zoom buttons where I can give you like all these reactions and stuff right now. So, you know, like retweet, etc. And so I do want to, I see a hand up. Why don't we go back to Eric with you guys, Allison, and then we'll take a break. Just so you know, we'll come back to these questions. We're going to have a synthesis where we're going to focus on some of the same questions again. So if you're a reflective thinker who needs more time to process, you will have your chance if you'd like to. And just want to acknowledge, these systems don't always apply for all learning styles. I know not everyone is comfortable sharing. Feel free to think your thoughts, talk about it later as you've had more time to process. Just as a pause point, don't feel like you must. There's different ways of learning, right? And different ways of reflecting. So let's go to Eric real quick, Allison, and then we'll go to the next portion.
Great.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to talk in front of other people, so obviously don't want to dominate the conversation. But I can't teach my own personal perspective. I can't teach even strategic management or any of the management and business courses that I do teach without talking about some of these issues, specifically about diversity, but also about institutionalized racism. As a manager, how can you understand your employees if you don't understand what the pressures on them from society are? Similar, if you're looking at customers and clients, you have to understand their lives and what they're experiencing to be able to connect with them and provide better value and services to them. So these are things that, just from an academic issue, we can't take out of the classroom. But what's happening is when this kind of academic freedom is impinged upon or extinguished, then that also will affect, and one of the questions on the slide is, what are the implications for NSE? We're looking also at a decline in enrollment nationwide. All of the universities and colleges are trying to fight to maintain their enrollment, to maintain their solvency and their viability. And this also becomes an issue of recruiting. This also becomes an issue of exchange. If the entire state of Alabama or some of the other states, primarily in the South and Midwest, pass laws like this that restrict the ability to discuss diversity issues, and not just critical race theory. There are bans on diversity discussion. If I was a minority student or a student who disagreed with these laws and these bans and these racist policies, I wouldn't want to go and enroll in a school in Alabama or in another state. I wouldn't want to do exchange to a college or university in those states where I know, hey, if I go there, the climate is hostile, not just to the discourse, but also to me as an individual. So this does have a broader effect in terms of campus recruitment, viability, and for national student exchange. I think it's going to be negative for a lot of the colleges and universities that are in the states where we have House bills or other forms of restriction on academic freedom. So, this is something that NSE should come out, and I'm pushing, our College of Business to push the AACSB to make a statement on it. I would push NSE to come out publicly as an institution and make a statement to all of the state governments on this issue and say, look, you're affecting your colleges and universities negatively in terms of receiving students, in terms of receiving the tuition from those students if it's going to be on post pay. Make it very clear what the impacts of these restrictive policies are.
Great, thanks, Eric. As Greg says, there's a lot of things we could talk about. I didn't know, Greg, are there people there that want to continue the discussion, or do you think we should move on since we're going to come back to this at the end?
I'm just thinking about what the run of show said in my head, at least. I know we're going to have time to come back.
Yeah, we will have time to come back. I think we should move on because we still have 2 other case studies to present. But thank you all for your comments and for this discussion. It's very helpful.
In an optimal world, we'd have you turn to your neighbors and stuff on Zoom and so forth. But hey, mixed pedagogy, right? So anyway, onward and upward.
All right, so really taking what the discussion questions that we had, and really both Ann and I'm just going to give kind of examples from our own campuses to maybe feed into that discussion a little bit. And really, as Mr. Rogers says, kind of looking for the helpers. What are people doing on your campuses individually within NSE? And what are you doing to help make this difference, help make our campuses a more welcoming, inclusive place for students, for your students, but also incoming exchange students from NSE and other programs as well. So to give you one example, and this is just one example from a small Midwest school, So I'm at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. A very quick overview of our campus demographics. We have 4 campuses, main campus in Green Bay, and 3 sub-campuses in the area. Total roughly about 9,800 students, predominantly a white institution, but we do have significant populations of Hispanic Latino students, African American, Southeast Asian, and First Nation students as well. We have a lot of Hmong students in that Southeast Asian category, and we have a lot of Somali students as well in the area that are moving in. We are a first-gen forward institution, so overall, almost 50% of our students identify as a first-generation college student. So that is really changing how we recruit students to the university in general, how I'm recruiting students in NSE toward other programs as well. Move to the next slide, please. So some of the campus efforts, and as a full disclaimer, I do both NSE and study abroad, so a lot of things kind of intertwine. But in terms of the campus itself, in the last several years, there have been a lot of really great individual efforts from both the administration, but also different departments on campus. So we've added a vice chancellor for inclusivity and student affairs. We have a first generation Phoenix, which is our mascot community, and a safe and inclusive living salient community within housing. So those students, they take some of the same classes, they live on the same floor in terms of that first generation. So they're really taking those classes, getting intro to college together. And then the safe and inclusive living community is meant for LGBTQ plus students, trans students, students who are allies who really want that environment and that safe space to be living and being themselves. We also just opened a barbershop on campus, primarily aimed at students of color, really to have that community space that they're really not able to find maybe close to the campus, elsewhere in the city, or just having challenges to get to those places in the city due to transportation issues, things like that. So that's something that's new that opened on our campus. And we're also continually in the top 25 Pride Index, and then campus strategic DEI goals really are to match our community. So the demographics of our students to matching the community of Green Bay itself. Next slide, please. So what is our office doing? So my position is within the Office of International Education. We also work with our international students coming in. So we're kind of a one-stop shop on campus, and that kind of affects how we really reach out to students and what our efforts are. Things that I have done in my role, we have really outreach to several different offices on campus to really highlight particular programs or really reach out to particular students and student groups and seeing what they're looking for, how they want to be involved with study away and study abroad. So this past year, reached out to our First Nations office, to our multicultural office, which we call MESA, our Pride Center. I've also been doing student presentations to, for example, Black Student Union, Southeast Asian Student Union, things like that, just to really highlight particular programs, scholarships that might be available, things like that, and really just to get students to know our face in our office. We also applied for an IDEAS grant that's more focused on study abroad. And then future plans, we're thinking about how to reach out to those first gen students better. How can we do that differently? How can we engage with their families through parent sessions, through virtual sessions, through different sorts of recruiting pairing with the admissions office. And then also updating our resources. So making sure our website is updated with resources, scholarships, focusing again on video presentations or anything that might be helpful for these groups of students. So that's what we're doing at UW Green Bay. Take it away, Anna.
Again, I'm Anna from Minnesota State Mankato. Our campus is somewhat similar to Green Bay in that we are a rural, predominantly white institution. We have about 15,000 students, including graduate students. We're about 42% first gen. I definitely say that number is about a year old, so that definitely is increasing every year. Unique to our campus is we actually have about 13% international students. About 10% of all students, international students from Ethiopia are actually on our campus. So it's about 230. So including a large population of Ivorian and Gambian students as well. Our campus is also about 15% students of color. And that number is also have been increasing every year too, including the efforts to support those students. We have about almost close to about 2,000 concurrent enrollment students as well. So we have a large number of PSEO students on our campus. So our campus is currently working towards Equity 2030. which is an initiative that strives to eliminate educational equity gaps at our university. So a couple of, I just want to highlight two programs that actually have been developed in the last like 2 years, specifically at pandemic. Another instance is one of them is our BISA team. So that's our Bias Incident Support and Advisory Team. And that is a group that has allowed it easier for students to report incidents of bias. It is a group of about 17 individuals who are part of this. It's led by our Director of African American Affairs and our Director of Title IX. And they meet twice a semester, and they really review how the university is responding to issues, how to deal with them, and to eliminate areas of bias in campus. Another area that was developed, so like the first year it's fully running, is our Village Mentoring Program. This program is designed to equip students with the tools to navigating the college experience from the first day on campus, even before they come on campus, to graduation. It is aimed at all of our students of color, and it is a partnership one-on-one between students and the faculty and staff here on campus. Other areas that have been around for a little while that we're really proud of is our living and learning communities. We have a minimum of 10 learning communities every year that's developed for students, both for freshmen and for upper division students. 3 specific that are aimed at the affinity groups we're talking about is BU, which is specifically for our Black males, multicultural group, and our one for first gen. Every semester we have a Maverick Diversity Institute. So we are the Mavericks. We have about 12 events happen each semester. If you attend at least 5 of those, you get a badge on LinkedIn, and we hold a lot of groups to that too. Those events are put on anywhere from our international center to a women's center, to a trio, multicultural center, and kind of everything in between. We also have a President's Commission on Diversity. They're really working on listening sessions right now with different groups, and specifically with the area of nursing. They're looking at how to provide more scholarships for students of color for nursing scholarships, and then looking at some of the best practices specifically within nursing simulations to better prepare students to work with more diverse populations. All right, next slide, please. All right, specifically at our office, things that we're doing to do more outreach is we do a monthly newsletter that goes out to about 700 people on campus, and we specifically target certain events that are happening travel-wise, NSE, and we're highlighting different student experiences in that newsletter as well. That's been a great marketing tool to share more about the study abroad and NSE efforts on campus. We do a lot of specific faculty information sessions, as well as GA to GA connections. So our GA, they're all part of their own cohorts, talking with other GAs to promote programs, and they have connections that are in campus to promote NSE and show the access that's offered to students. We eventually changed eligibility for transfer students, so they're able to go on some programs the first semester on campus or the second semester, which is hoping to create more access. We get a lot of transfer students from our local community colleges in Minneapolis and St. Paul. In the areas of relationship building, we do monthly language and culture sessions, really to connect our exchange students with our students who may be going on exchange, to learn about the cultures they're going to understand some of the language, best practices from students that are currently here on campus. We're doing that also with our Hmong Student Association. They have been wanting to lead a couple events too, just to understand the different student populations that are on our campus. And so that's been really fun to see. We've been doing them virtually and in person. We've been getting about 20 students per event, which is actually really good turnout for us, which has been fun to see. We're also currently part of the American Council on Education Internalization Lab, which is an 18-month internalization project, which have a specific focus on DEI and actually on domestic programs as well. Future, what we're doing is we're currently in the process of developing a better partnership with the Multicultural Center. We do monthly events and tabling with them, but to do more GA projects together, that's currently in the works, and offering scholarships to students as well.
Okay. I'm Daniela again. And Brooke and I are going to be tag teaming the next couple of slides. I'm going to move quickly just because I joined the DEI committee after last year's session, and I joined it because of the discussion that it allowed us to have. So I really would like to make sure that we have the opportunity to discuss as well. But really quickly, Brooke and I are going to be talking about just advising practices and orientation practices that we do to support diversity and inclusion initiatives, and to support diversity and inclusion practices for National Student Exchange. So in terms of advising, I have a lot of students who are interested in going to islands and beaches. And so I always think that it's really important to push students to think beyond the beauty of a beach. So I always ask them, what is a US territory? Why do we call it a US territory? Why is this different than a state? Why is it that Hawaii is a beautiful tourist destination? What do you know about the native populations of Hawaii? I encourage them to think beyond the physical locations that they are going to, not because they shouldn't be appreciating the beauty of these areas, but because there is more to them, and their experiences there, I think, would be more meaningful, more complicated if they know these things, and also they will also hopefully be more respectful when they do go on exchange. So Brooke and I did make a resource page with some of the resources that we'll be mentioning that is linked into the WOVA session for this session. I also use the comparison view on the NSE on the map site, just to give students an idea of how the United States is so regionally different, how Canada included is so regionally different. And as I mentioned before, I'm a history teacher. Prior to this job, I was a history teacher, so I always include that in my advising. And I think if we're talking about issues of diversity and inclusion, it's impossible to not talk about history a little bit in terms of getting students to understand where they're going. And I will pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke. A few other things Danielle and I talked about for this session particularly is just how, as NSE coordinators, we could think about this in that advising phase. So a few other things we discussed, which we could share, is like a scavenger hunt for your students, that as they're researching their campuses, that picking out some of the things that they should be looking for at their sites. I live in the education abroad world, so we have resources like looking at the Department of State website, things like that. So we've kind of recreated that in the NSE world, so that way their knowledge is power, and that students are looking at these campuses and learning what they need to prior to making a decision on where they apply. We also mentioned the comparison feature, but the NSE site also recently added a resources tab. So when you're on the profile pages for your campus or the different campuses, if you haven't added those resources in yet, please do. As an advisor, when looking at profile campuses, there's now a resources tab all the way to the right for different affinity groups for students, and that will help you directly link to those campuses where your students might affiliate with those groups. So that's a really great resource when you're looking to advise students. And I think I'll leave it there and we'll go to the next slide.
Okay, really quickly. In terms of supporting diverse students from diverse populations, as Brooke just mentioned, the resources pages on every single campus profile now are really good tools for advising, even just to show students, if they haven't disclosed anything to you, if you think this is not a student from a diverse background, I always show it to students just because there is probably something about this student that you're talking to that you don't know. And so I always highlight those pages. I also, when I send my first follow-up email from advising, I add as the last line in that email, if there's anything about you that you would like me to know and that you would like to talk about in our next meeting, I'm happy to, know that about you and talk to you about that. And in terms of pre-departure, I always include an activity that has students reflect on their intersecting identities, has them think about how others may view their identities, what aspects of their identities are perhaps invisible to other people when they first meet somebody for the first time. And then I have students make goals based on how they identify. And then it also opens up a conversation for you to connect those students to other resources as well, or again, go back to the resources on the NSE profile pages. I think we're good. Yeah, I think maybe now we can move on to just a broader discussion, but there are a whole host of resources that are on the WOBA app for this session too.
So I think DEI committee friends, we were going to facilitate the discussion for our sections. So I don't remember who had the first question.
All right, this kind of goes back on Gemini's presentation. So we kind of wanted to ask what committees, events, organizations have been implemented on your campus since the pandemic started that you feel is important to the growth of what you guys are looking at in the areas of DEI and beyond.
And those on Zoom, feel free to put something in the chat as well. We're monitoring that too.
So I'm Madeline Wilcox from Thomas Jefferson University. We got a chief diversity officer during the pandemic, and there's been a lot of listening sessions. One great thing is that the colleges now have diversity action councils. One challenge is that offices that don't fall in the college structure aren't built into that. So what we notice is Study Away does not have a home within those action councils. So we're doing stuff in academic affairs, but it's not organized. A lot of that is personal initiatives or things we're working across. And so that's one thing, is if there are those initiatives, I'm trying to find ways to speak up and find space for that. But that can, making sure there's where you fit in the organization can really impact your voice, your action. And that can sometimes be a barrier if you don't have a home. Or, you can find ways through other personal networks. So that's one thing I'm navigating right now, is trying to find a space where we can participate in those diversity action councils in a more structured way.
I think for the sake of time, if you want to share anything from those questions also up there that you maybe do on your campus or do a practice that you use as advising, we would love to hear it as well. Or if you have come across any challenges, we would love to hear that as well.
Hi, everybody. Erica Benhart, Stony Brook University. One thing that I really try to be aware of is my privileges when I'm advising my students. I often make mistakes and find myself just recommending campuses that focus, or I don't really take into, what's the word? When I'm recommending campuses, I'm like, oh, have you thought about Texas? Not thinking about, is this a trans student? So for me, and something I'm constantly working on, is just being aware of my privileges and keeping those in mind and in check when I'm advising students and making campus recommendations. And so the more questions I'm asking them versus what I've heard from other students going on exchange or my own opinions of the campuses and locations is really important for me. And that's something that I'm trying to work on when it comes to this type of discussion and thoughts.
My name is Jessie. I'm from Sam Houston State University. I just got here, but I was also working in study abroad at another school. Representation matters in study abroad offices. Well, really in any offices. So just keep in mind when you guys are hiring, looking for new people, that representation matters. I encountered students coming in, maybe they didn't want to talk to me. Maybe they wanted a male, maybe they wanted a female, maybe they wanted, a Hispanic person. But representation definitely matters to make them more comfortable to come to you with their issues and wanting to study abroad or wanting to do NSE.
If I may, good afternoon. This is Talia Stradiron from UVI St. Thomas campus. And so this is a really good discussion, and I'm happy to hear that there are some campuses that are making efforts to get their students to think about these things before arriving. Because it's always surprising to me as a coordinator for students to get to UVI and be surprised that they are at an HBCU. And I never understand that, because I'm like, something is missing here. How did they miss something so important, right? And so having these discussions with students is really important. But something I started, which I think, even from the home campus can be done, if I tried this semester to have a meet and greet prior to their arrival. And as part of that, I tried to include some cultural aspects in there so they can get some information if they haven't done it on their own, to help them to prepare for that cultural experience. So I found that to be helpful. So I don't know if other people have tried that. I think it can go both ways, from both ends.
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Actually, I want to kind of respond with Dahlia. And first of all, thank you for taking one of our students. I had all of our students this semester that were outgoing are members of our MAID program, which is Minorities Achieving Dreams of Excellence. And when they first, I was going and presenting to the organization for the past few semesters and have had a lot of interest. When the students come to my office and they start looking at the different campuses, and then of course they have the hierarchy or the ranking of what they prefer to go to the campuses, I actually started talking to them about some of the HBCUs in particular, and the Virgin Islands was one that came up multiple times. And so I would show them the demographic breakdown, and then of course with the Virgin Islands, the cultural and historical aspects. And then you start seeing that their rankings, the order of the preference for the campuses actually changed. So previously they were wanting, and nothing wrong with going to New York City, that's wonderful. I say, go somewhere and there's all wonderful places to go, but consider this and look at some of the demographics and think about studying in an environment where you actually would be the majority instead of the minority. And then almost immediately they start moving the ranking of where they prefer to go. And I think, pointing out some of the demographics and including that, which I'm grateful that that's on the NSE website, making it easier for us to do that without even having to do our homework. Just, hey, look at this information that's available right here in the campus description, that minority students respond to that. And so I'm really happy we have 2 students going, one to St. Croix, one to St. Thomas, and I'm thrilled. I'm jealous too. I mean, I wish I could go.
I think we have time for maybe one more comment.
Hi, this is Paula from the University of New Hampshire. Some of you may know I'm in the process of writing a dissertation, and one of the articles I recently read has really been just echoing in my head over and over again. And it challenges people in the study abroad and study away field to look at how we market our programs, especially that we market it sort of centering middle-class values of independence and adventure. And this article helped me to reframe some of my marketing. Yes, I still do the push yourself, get out of your comfort zone, but I also address things like saying, Maybe every day on our predominantly white campus, you have to code switch and you're exhausted from that. Maybe we can help you find a campus where you don't have to do that anymore. And you can still get all your scholarships, but you can experience what it's like on the other side of having your community, building your community and focusing not on independence and adventure and tourism, but building your own network, finding your support systems, and not having that exhaustion of always having to code switch. So I've used it in some presentations, and I've had students come up to me later and say that that was really meaningful to them. And so I've also passed this on to Deb and David so that we can look at some of the NSE marketing materials and say, are we all about adventure and getting out there, and whose values does that center?
Can you share that article with us?
Actually, we already did. It's at the very bottom of one of those emails that goes out, like what we're reading right now, but I'll ask Deborah to put it back up there.
Okay, thank you all for contributing to the discussion. I loved hearing your perspectives and sharing what's going on in your campus and your thoughts. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for attending. Like we had mentioned previously, the resources are available on the Whova app. Our committee, again, we are dedicated to serving the consortium and NSE coordinators and students. So if there is a future topic, a webinar topic, or an entirely new activity that you would like to suggest to the DEI committee, we would be happy to hear those suggestions. You could email it to me. And also, if you wanted to join our happy group, we would love to have you. We're a great bunch of dedicated NSE coordinators. I love this group. I have fun with them. So we would love to have you. We meet once a month. And we put together several activities throughout the semester, mostly webinars up until this point, but we are open to other types of suggestions. So again, if you'd like to join, please reach out to me. And I think that's all. Committee members, am I missing anything? Okay, if not, thank you again for joining us. It was so awesome to chat with you all, and we look forward to continuing DEI efforts for you. Thank you.